There we go. And you can see that they're of a random size. You can see there's quite a bit of size variation in there. That's because the size is actually inherited initially from this shape, then the scale is changed, and then that is actually inherited by the shape mark operator. You can see it's actually inheriting the local space scale of the object. You can actually modify the percentage of that scale that will actually be inherited. So you can see basically it's effectively a kind of scale. Put that back to 100, and then again you've got another variation value on top of that, so you can actually add even more randomness to the scale of your objects. And it looks like actually that's actually a multiplier which is actually applied on top of this value here. So you can see it's actually exaggerating the scale differences between the different particles. So you can see the small ones get smaller, the big ones get bigger. We'll put that back to 0. Now, another thing that you can actually do is when the particle strikes the surface, it'll actually work out what the angle is when it strikes the surface, and it can actually distort that shape mark along that direction of impact. So if we turn on impact angle distortion, you can see now our particles are being distorted along the angle of impact that they hit on. We turn back to world space, you can actually see this is actually much more obvious when we turn on world space. Now, so far you can see the particles. If I scrub along the timeline, you can see the particles hit, and they're staying aligned to the actual teapot, but they're not actually sticking to the surface. If you look at the surface is wobbling around, and you can see that the particles are created. This might be easier if I actually change the teapot to display as a box. There you can see the particles are coming in, they're creating their shapes, and then they actually just stay exactly where they are. Now you can actually have that's because when the shape is generated, shape mark actually stores the face and the position on that face, as well as the point's position in space relative to its target pivot. If align surface animation, aligned to surface animation is turned on, the face ID and the position data is used to lock the shape to that face, even if it's on an animating mesh. So without this option active, as you can see here, the shape is static, and on an animating surface it will actually be left in its initial position, so it doesn't look very accurate. So if we want our shapes, I'll actually turn off impact angle distortion to actually get smaller shapes here. So if we want our shapes to actually adhere to the surface, we need to turn on align to surface animation. So I'll turn on that value here, and you can see that as the teapot moves along now, you can see that the individual shapes are actually sticking to the surface. You can see they're deforming with it. What I'll actually do is I'll get the transformation of this object. If I just go to filter, current transform, and look at this object, you can see that I'll just change the animation. It's here. Let me just turn off the flow for a second just to get a little bit better sort of interactive performance. I'll drag this key down here so it actually gets a little bit sooner. There we go. And go to the curve editor, you can see I've actually got some keys up here still, so I'll just get rid of those. There we go. So now the teapot moves in and comes to a stop by frame 70, and it still wobbles around. Now if I turn the flow back on, you'll actually see a little bit more clearly what I was talking about there. You can see it moves across, comes to a stop, and you can see as the shape of the teapot is fluctuating, you can see that the shapes are actually sticking to the surface. Now, so far we've been using a rectangle. One of the most powerful features of this particular operator is that it doesn't have to be a simple rectangle. You can actually generate a shape on the surface which actually conforms to the surface, and it's a little bit like a Boolean. You can imagine that when the particle strikes the surface, it creates a little box